And welcome to another edition of Rosen Sports Monday. Mark Rosen back with you post 4th of July. And I thought before we chat with our guest, sports psychologist Rick Aberman, I'm looking forward to that. Let's talk about my weekend, your weekend, see if you can relate to some of the stuff I went through. 4th of July week, it seemed the general consensus I got from a lot of people was that it was pretty low key for a lot of people, which is not a bad thing. Just didn't have that usual oomph. I mean, I'm sure people have their normal picnics and getaways and fishing and going up at the cabin, et cetera, et cetera. But it didn't have that extra little oomph to it. But that was fine. It was very relaxing for me in the whole week. I mean, that's the whole point of having a vacation like this. I celebrated my wife's 60th birthday. We took a road trip up to Kohler, Wisconsin, which I'd never been to before. About an hour drive from Milwaukee, real easy drive. Absolute oasis. I'm sure you've heard of Kohler. If you don't have a Kohler appliance in your bathroom, it was very relaxing. Very, very relaxing. I'm one that's I'm a dude, but man, I like my spa services. I love them. They're very relaxing. I needed it. Lots of walking, great food. Very special couple of days for Karin. And then I came back over the weekend, and my son, Nick, who lives out in Los Angeles, came in with a bunch of friends that he has from San Francisco, where he used to live, and they rented a house over by Lake of the Isles, a little Airbnb, and worked out great. In fact, I think he's leaving town later this afternoon. And, he had a great time. He came over we all watched the fireworks together over the Stone Arch Bridge, which was phenomenal. They went to a Twins game on Saturday afternoon. In fact, one of the Twins games where they had the walk-off bottom of the ninth win, so that was kind of fun. I don't get to see him all that often anymore. I'm not going to pretend. It's not easy. It's tough. Obviously, he lives in Los Angeles. He's got a job out there. But my goodness, he's turning 40 this December. We were walking out at the restaurant the other day, and I said, when in the hell did this happen? And I think it hit me harder than him. It seemed like yesterday when we were going to Blockbuster on a Friday night looking for the new releases, you know what I mean, the video, and he got his video games, and you'd get to have his pick of one or two, and he'd grab those. And in fact, it kind of came to full circle yesterday. Late yesterday afternoon, I was home alone, and Jurassic Park came on. It was on TV, and I looked it up. Of course, it came out, I think, in 1993. When he was 8 years old. Nick was 8 years old. In fact, I saw the movie by myself at the Edina Theater because I wanted to make sure it was appropriate for him to go see it. Think about it. And it was just a ridiculous thing to think about. But, of course, he went right away. But I guess my message to all the young parents out there in particular is to really savor all this time. I mean, you hear the old cliche that it goes by in a hurry, but it really goes by in a hurry. I can't believe I'm going to have a 40-year-old son. But you know what? It's the way it's supposed to be. Life goes around like that, and you enjoy it. I enjoy his company and his intelligence and his opinions about everything, even if we don't agree on everything, more now than ever before. But there's still that little twinkle in his eye and in my eye to think, man, it just seems like yesterday when we were goofing around and going to, Blockbuster Video and hanging out at the park and doing all that stuff. So he's going to be back to celebrate his 40th birthday. His birthday is December 28th. He's going to come back over Christmas. The Vikings, of course, host the Dallas Cowboys on Christmas Day, 3:30 game. So for those of you planning your Christmas Day, shocking, the NFL is playing at Christmas again. In fact, the Vikings are playing at Christmas against Dallas, so I'm sure I'll wrangle up a couple tickets for them. The birthday, as I mentioned, is on the 28th, so that'll be special to have him in town. He's excited about that, so all will be good. So enjoy your time with your kids right now in particular, because before you know it, you won't be going, well, there aren't any more video stores anymore. They just get online and look at them. I miss those days too. Anyway, enough about that. Had a good weekend, great weekend. It's nice to be back, and I will be back with our special guest, Rick Aberman, right after this. And off we go with another official edition of Rosen Sports Monday, and my special guest, a fellow St. Louis Park alum, Rick Aberman. I'm trying to get your official title. I know you're a sports psychologist, peak performance. How would you, what's on your business card if you have one?
Actually, my business card I had with the Twins for over 20 years was Director of Peak Performance.
Okay, that sounds like all-encompassing.
All-encompassing.
Yes.
And My wife wasn't sure about it when Terry Ryan asked me about it. She said, "Well, you should ask me about that." But that's,
yeah, I'd be afraid if I was a dude walking around with a card that had peak performance on it.
Exactly.
I'll be the judge of that.
I'm the director. I was the director for a long time.
Well, going back to your roots and our roots, growing up in St. Louis Park, how did that kind of prepare you? Because we talk about there was something in the water. I've talked about it. I did a segment here about St. Louis Park and the number of alums that we had that went through that school system. We don't have to list them all. Obviously, I can list a few with Thomas Friedman and the Coen brothers, et cetera, et cetera. But what was it about growing up in that environment that you think helped lend you to where you are today and spent your career?
Yeah. Well, I think there were a number of things. Primarily, it was I felt like I could do just about whatever I wanted to do, not in terms of what people allow me, but really in terms of life pursuits. I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a psychologist. And I remember in the 9th grade, taking out books, reading about psychologists. And I think it was because my parents took me to see a psychologist because we were arguing a lot and all this. And I remember being with the psychologist and he says, "Do you know why you're here?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm really not sure why." And he says, "Well, your parents are concerned about you and wanted to make sure that everything was okay." And I felt great.
You didn't push back on it?
I didn't push back on it at all. In fact, I really liked the guy. And from that time on, I like that. If I'm going to have to work for a living, I may as well do something that I really enjoy. My
initial reaction to hearing you talk like that would be, I think most people would go, I'm pushing back on that. You know what? I didn't really want to go. I don't want to take my own kids there. I've gone through it with my family before. And I love it. I went through a lot of therapy when my wife passed away and a lot of that, which really helped me get through it. But to make a career out of it, to think, well, this is the last thing I want to do after having to go through this. But that's interesting that you knew almost right away this is what you wanted to do.
I really liked the guy. I thought it was fun talking to him. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. And I also figured that if I can get paid for learning more about myself, that's not a bad career.
So how did your trials and error lead you to where you eventually got into this job professionally?
So I think, going back to your initial question about what is it in the water or whatever, and for me, and I think from my perspective, it's a lot about family and about, you knew people cared about you. And when you played outside at the neighbors and we were out until it got dark and nobody worried, and some of that was just the time. But the other thing was that you just felt like there were people that cared about you around somewhere. And you didn't always see them, but you felt it. Yeah. And that gave me the security, I think, to try something that, wasn't exactly in the catalogs or, there's no how-to on how to do some of these things.
Well, growing up, you had your circle of friends. Yeah. Everyone said, what do you want to do? Go into business. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor. Right. I want to do this. I want to do that. Would you tell your friends, I want to be a psychologist?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it just happened naturally.
It just sort of happened naturally. It's not like I was walking around as some weird little guy saying I want to be a shrink. But and then I probably wouldn't have had any friends. But as I got older, it was just something I pursued.
So how did you start out? I mean, professionally?
Yeah. So I did all my schooling at the University of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD all at Wisconsin. And then I ended up going to work for the university, and I did that as the psychologist for the athletic department. And this is another one of those things. This was in the early 80s or mid 80s. Mm-hmm. And this was like a new idea. And I remember I was a runner. I wasn't a great runner, certainly not good enough to run at Wisconsin. But I knew that many of the people that I was around running and competitors, they weren't necessarily so introspective. And they didn't necessarily know how to maybe deal with some of their inner world a little bit. And So I remember I'm thinking about, as I'm finishing up my degree, I want to work with populations that I knew well. And so that was sports. That was also in business. I was interested in business, having come from a family business. And oddly enough, the other component was media. And I actually did a summer project at WCCO TV. And
where was I?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I told a lot of people about, but I helped them do some research.
Oh, some research. Did you meet with anyone individually?
No.
Okay.
No. It was just, I wanted to, my ideas about being a psychologist were, initially you think of meeting one-on-one with people, but it's really, I was involved in much more than that. And for example, from that summer, I was looking at why people do different leisure activities. And I think there was a show that predated like Entertainment Tonight. I forgot what they called it.
On CCO?
On CCO.
It may have been, not the Bill Carl. I know what Steve Doyle hosted it, and there's someone else. I can't remember, but I know what you're speaking of.
And so I was doing research on trends and things like that.
Sure.
And I thought, okay, well, that was good, but not good enough for me to earn a living or want to do much more of it.
Going back to your early years at Wisconsin, and you just mentioned the working with kind of the early years of sports and thinking about improving your performance. I remember I played a lot of tennis, and there was a book on inner tennis, inner golf, and that was the first time I remember reading or hearing about kind of the psychology of peak performance and making yourself. I was never going to be Roger Federer. Well, back then there wasn't a Roger Federer, but you know what I mean. But I want to be the best version of myself, and that was a big thing back then, right? Yeah. And that was unusual. It was against the grain. It
was very much against the grain because in those days, we focused on the physical. And anything that was emotional or psychological was thought of sort of the soft sciences. And, as I'm talking about this and recalling it, I'm thinking, in some ways we've come a long way. And in other ways, we haven't gone as far as I wish we would have come in terms of soft science, hard science sort of thing.
Again, we're talking with Rick Aberman, sports psychologist, among other things he does, works with businesses as well. How did the athletes at Wisconsin, was it a voluntary? Did you work with them?
Yeah. So what happened there was this was kind of a new concept. And I wanted to be a psychologist for the athletes in the athletic department. And I went to the dean of students at the time who I knew, and it helped me with a number of things. And I was talking with him about what I wanted to do. And he said, great idea, it'll never happen. And I said, well, who would I talk to see if this never, ever happens? And so he gave me the name of, Elroy Hirsch.
My goodness.
Was the athletic director at the time.
For those kids out there, Google Elroy Hirsch, Crazy Legs Hirsch.
Crazy Legs Hirsch.
This guy was one of the greatest athletes, football players ever. I mean, and he was the athletic director at Wisconsin when you were there.
Not much of an administrator, but
really.
But he was a good fundraiser, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's all that mattered.
That's exactly what mattered. So I went over there, and Elroy put me in touch with his deputy athletic director, and I talked to him about what I wanted to do. And I guess my luck, there were two things going on. One, he was a former superintendent of schools, so he was an educator. So he was very interested in the person and the student athlete, although we didn't call him that then, but the athletes. And the other thing was there was this is a very unfortunate situation, but it was around the time where there was an NCAA championship. This was early June in track and field. And it was the finals was being held in Indianapolis. The defending champion in the 10,000 meters, a woman named Kathy Ormsby, she was running and positioned to 3/4 through the race, positioned to repeat as a champion. 3/4 through the race, she ran off the track ran a block and a half down the road and jumped off a bridge.
Oh my God.
Yep.
I've never heard this story.
You've never heard this. No. So this was, I think it was 86.
Oh.
And so coming back, so the person who ended up winning that race, the number 2 person, was one of our runners at Wisconsin.
Okay.
And when she was interviewed and when I talked with her, she said, people are saying, well, what is this? What happened? This woman, she was pre-med, she was engaged, she was a student,
right.
top
Checked
everything,
all the boxes.
All the boxes. And the woman from Wisconsin, whose name was Stephanie Herbst, said, I know exactly how she felt. And that got the attention of our deputy athletic director, Ralph Neal, at the time. And he said, if you want to make this work, I'll help you do it. And so that's what we did. I set up a program, designed a program where I was an in-house psychologist for the athletes at the University of Wisconsin. And that was the first of its kind at any Division I school. Up until that point, any kind of psychology and sports was always much more performance enhancement on the performance side. And this was really about the mental health and the well-being of the student athletes. Now, as we will talk about later, I never separate the person from the performance. And so, if you have talent, many of my clients, some of them are the best of the world at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like they don't know how to concentrate and they don't know how to focus and they don't know how to do these things, but there's something going on with them that's getting in their way that we see on the field. We don't understand it. We may see it in terms of a lack of performance, whatever it is. We see, that's the cool thing about sports. We see things on the field, but we don't always know what to make of it.
Getting back to that tragedy in
Yes.
Wisconsin, is the suggestion that other runner was saying was that the pressure of being that good? I mean, people go through pressure all the time, but it's one thing to be take your. I can't even say the words. Take your life, but another to deal with it in a much different way. There's been some other elements involved.
So it's important to note she did not die. She survived. She survived.
Oh, okay.
Now,
okay. She jumped off a bridge.
I think she was a quadriplegic.
Oh, well.
But she did not.
Oh, my God.
She did survive.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the pressures to succeed. One of the things, Mark, that we're not so good at, we do a really good job of helping people figure out how to become successful. But we do a very, very poor job of helping them handle the success. Like with success comes a whole nother set of issues that people tend not to talk about because you're successful. Right. You're doing well. You're making money. You're making more money than you ever imagined in your life, or you're competing at the highest level. You've won all the awards and all the accolades. But what that leads to sometimes is not just maybe a drop in performance, but there's a tremendous amount of psychological challenges that you are faced, and it's not all pathological. It's just these are the challenges playing at this level.
Yeah, have those expectations changed with social media, being more exposed to everything? Just the athlete of today, whether it be male or female. At the collegiate level, let's go with that. I'm sure we can go back and talk about what's going on at the youth level. I'm sure you have a lot of opinions about that. But have you seen it change with the notoriety and some of the expectations and the pressures that these young people face today more than ever?
No question. And I've had many conversations with a guy like Joe Mauer, for example, who was as good as it gets in terms of being a number one in everything. He was just a great athlete. Talking about a Byron Buxton and the difference between a Joe Mauer as a number one and a Byron Buxton as essentially a number one. I think it was number two, but that pressure with the social media and the notoriety and the focus and the visibility, it's just different.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know that as a media person, you don't go out to lunch with the players anymore. You don't meet them for a cup of coffee. You get a time when you can be part of a pool in question.
Correct.
Which is a whole different deal.
Yeah, it's much less personal than it used to be.
So we have much more accessibility. And then you throw this in, and we can talk about this as well, not just the social media, but in the college sports, the NIL. And, I work with a team out at North Carolina, University of North Carolina, the women's tennis team. And it's a great story. I can get into it. But in the meantime, I'm reading about their recruits in the Wall Street Journal and about how they're the cost of recruiting today this is women's tennis.
Yeah.
And so this is
not a high volume, high money making sport.
No. And the demands and what these people are coming in now as we have a young 17-year-old, she might be 18-year-old now coming in. She has a $500,000 NIL deal. Came in with several sponsorships, like 3-4 sponsorships, national sponsors for tennis. And she's got more social media followers than the entire athletic department at UNC.
My God.
2 point some million.
Yeah, so, that's a lot to handle for a 17, 18-year-old.
Yes.
I mean, it's the whole world. You've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it, obviously, but you're seeing it from your perspective when you're meeting these athletes in particular one-on-one has changed dramatically. And it can money, talking about the root of all evil, can change a young person in a hurry.
It's the money, it's the notoriety, the influencers. You ever think of yourself as an influencer?
Not really.
No, you just went. No, I'm sure you have influenced many, good and bad.
Yeah, different way.
Myself as well. But
right.
Now that's an awareness that younger people have. And I'm not here to say it's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
This is just what it is. And we have to be able to help people deal with those challenges. And, I think about the things, from a leadership standpoint, all kinds of things. But, there's psychological things that go on that are not that different. When somebody makes it all about them and
mm-hmm.
egos, and when you get that kind of attention, whether you're the biggest kid on your little league team, and you move up and you're the best kid, there's a lot of things that happen. Take the money out of it. Just psychologically, right. Your self-perception, your identity, and how you relate to other people and how other people relate to you. Those are things that have always been there, but now it's just magnified.
You mentioned Joe Mauer and Byron Buxton. You were with the Twins organization for, 20 years or so?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
And, they have their own hitting instructors, fielding. They got the whole thing. They got all the latest equipment that they possibly need, medical. So, I mean, was it a hard sell? Were the players... Were you getting pushback at all from the hitting instructors, or I got this? You don't need me to tell you what's going on with Joe Mauer's swing.
Yeah, yes and no. The answer is there's always been those people, and probably always will be those people. And I've worked, with most of the teams in town. I was with the Vikings for many years,
mm-hmm.
but there I didn't really work with many of their players. It was mostly the coaching staff, and with the Twins, it was. And I should say ownership as well. Yeah. But with the Twins, I was much more embedded in there over the years. But I think, many people still feel threatened because mm-hmm. they don't know. Some of it is ego. They want to be the guy.
Right.
I was with a team, San Jose Sharks.
Hockey team.
Yep. They brought me out there, and I think it was in their first couple of years, they had a great run in the Stanley Cup, and they were having some issues and brought me out there right before the playoffs to work with a couple of their all-star players there was some team mm-hmm. dynamics going on. And all of a sudden, we had flown to Detroit for the playoffs and won that series. And the manager, the coach, comes up to me, wants to meet with me, and we're talking. Turns out, at the time, the trainer was talking to other guys about, don't talk to that guy. You can't trust that guy. Who is this guy? And spreading all these weird rumors. And it was creating turmoil within the team. So we're in a playoff run. And, it's like, I don't need to mess with that. And so I ended up actually leaving the team at that point, still working with the player. But it was, a trainer, an athletic trainer who, in those days, not unlike Fred Zamberletti, except Fred was a terrific guy.
He was.
They saw themselves as the team psychologist. Yeah. It was always the trainer because they were closest to the players. In fact, when I was at Wisconsin starting this thing, I insisted that I be part of the medical staff and my office by the training room.
Which makes sense.
Because those are the people that see everybody every day, and they're the trusted people.
Well, you were ahead of the curve. I mean, it's funny because I was watching the movie Bull Durham the other night, and there's that famous scene. Tim Robbins was the pitcher, right? Yeah. And the character, Susan Sarandon told him he was having trouble with a lot of his issues, to breathe through his eyelids. That was the advice she gave him, and that was iconic movie. Yeah. But even then, it was the psychology. That was her psychology of the jinxes, the players. How many players are superstition?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You deal with that all the time.
All of the time, and and those things they seem goofy, but I've had people that, somebody was warming up to, it was an invited guest was going to throw out the first pitch of the game. And it was a CEO of a big time company. And so, he wanted to warm up. And so he just grabbed a glove in front of the dugout. Well, the player comes back.
Oh boy.
And it was like, you may as well not have sat him down for the game, because this guy was not going to be worth anything during the game.
Because he touched, the guy put his glove on.
Guy put his glove on, yep.
That's crazy.
And, anyway, but that's how deep those things go. The power of the mind is really impressive, and it can work for you or against you.
Yeah.
But understanding it and knowing it and learning it and gain comfort with it, that's what we're trying to do.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from our wonderful sponsors, Broadway Dental, Dr. Ben Stein, and Lexus of Maplewood, Lexus of Wayzata, my good friend Charlie Swanson as well. So we'll be back in a minute with Rick Aberman. Stay with us. Hey, Rosie here for Broadway Dental and my good friend Dr. Ben Stein. I'm a patient of Dr. Stein's at both his sleep apnea clinic and dental clinic. He has a newly renovated and conveniently located dental office in Northeast Minneapolis, next to Certix. I mean, it's the most modern facility you could possibly find. Dr. Stein has a great chairside manner. He's nice. He's understanding. He obviously knows his stuff, and he'll spend quality time with each patient. We'll make sure they are properly cared for. I want to talk about beyond the obvious dental care is sleep apnea. I was diagnosed with it years ago, and I was stuck with that silly, cumbersome CPAP machine, and I couldn't wait to get rid of it. And I mentioned it to Dr. Stein, and he set me up with his sleep appliance area. And it's the easiest thing in the world. You just pop an upper, lower appliance in each night. My snoring is gone. My wife says I don't snore at all. And I get a restful night's sleep. And if you have sleep apnea, Dr. Stein is the best to see as well to help you in that area. So if you want to contact them in Broadway Dental, give them a call at 612-379-2300. That's 612-379-2300. Hey, Rosie here for Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. If you're in the market for a new luxury vehicle, look no further than my good friend Charlie Swanson at Lexus. Whether you're on the west or the east side of the Twin Cities, they have got you covered with two great locations, Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. Check out the all-new Lexus TX, a spacious SUV with 3 rows of seating and plenty of room for all your gear. Head over to lexusofwayzata.com or lexusofmaplewood.com for details and to find your next ride today. And we're back with Rick Aberman. Interesting conversation about the psychology of sports. And you also mentioned you work with CEOs of business as well, looking for your services. In what context has that changed over the years, and just dealing with employees, the pressures of the job?
Yeah. It's interesting because So I have always had a focus on the leadership of the organization because I see things more systemically.
Mm-hmm.
So I can help an individual player or an employee or an executive kind of deal with their own life and help them deal with their sanity. But if the system or organization is dysfunctional, all I'm doing is putting on Band-Aids or putting out fires. So I have chosen to look more broadly, and I see things systemically. And so being able to address things from a leadership standpoint, like when I was with the Vikings, I wouldn't start with the players. I want to start with the people at the top. And that's always been the case wherever I go. Because otherwise, like I say, I can only be so effective. The problem is you run into things like egos. You run into the person who's sort of the lay psychologist. And, in the early days of my career, some of those people in the business world, they were in HR and they kind of migrated a little bit to leadership development. But so many of the worlds that I work with, I look around and these are very successful, large, sometimes global companies. And I look at the leadership team and they're all about people and all this stuff, but there's nobody there with an expertise in people.
Interesting.
Like they have business people,
right?
And they understand the industry and the finances and all those kind of media and marketing, the whole deal. But as a person who's training as a psychologist, that's what I know. And so to me, it's like, doesn't it make sense to have somebody who ought to know something about people, especially at the higher levels? And so that is a seemingly, basic idea and basic concept, but it's really threatening to people. It can be really threatening to people. So,
especially when you achieve that level, they feel like they kind of know it all.
They kind of know it all, which is like the worst thing to ever get to that point when you feel like you know it all. I had told you about working with the team at the women's tennis team at UNC,
right.
Brian Calvis and Tyler Thompson. They've done a tremendous job, and they've always been a top 5 team. And Brian's been there for 20 years and the winningest coach in women's tennis. And so he's been around. They've gotten to the Final Four 3 out of 4 years and never made it past. Never made it to the finals and never won a championship. And so Brian called, Tyler called, and Brian said, we must be doing something where we're getting in our own way, and I don't know what it is. Do you think I can help? Do you think?
Right.
And I said, yeah, I think I probably can. Well, let's talk about it. And so we did. And what was exciting for me, and the reason why I took the assignment, was because here's a very, very successful person who wasn't afraid to look at themselves. And that takes a lot of ego strength. And so when we talk about leadership, it's surprising how few people have that. And when you do have that, then you have a chance to be at your best. Yeah. My job's to help people see how they get in their own way. That's everybody, right?
It is everybody.
Yeah.
There's also been, I think over the years, certainly a stigma attached to the mental health of professional athletes. And, it's not like, you can see someone with a cast on their arm or limping around or whatever it might be. And I think of a guy like Kevin Love, who played for the Minnesota Timberwolves and now, been around the league for a while, has been very open about his mental health issues. And that's got to be helping a lot of people to finally open that door to say it's okay to say, I'm not okay.
Yes. It is, first of all, it's probably a relief for Kevin Love, and I don't know him, but I'm sure to be able to talk about those things is helpful, and to be able to make it more okay and sort of normalize things. And that was what I originally wanted to start out, why I wanted to be in the athletics department at Wisconsin, to make it normal. Because what would typically happen, if somebody was having an issue, they would be referred to the University Hospital, the counseling center, whatever it is. But it had to be bad enough for it to be recognized in order for them to be referred. And if they would in fact go, then they may be dealing with somebody who has no idea what their world is about. And I've had athletes say, I'm not going to go back there. I run 140 miles a week. One young man's telling me 120, 140 miles a week in those days. And he's just telling me I'm overtrained. Well, he's not going back. And the coach sure isn't going to send him back. And so we want to normalize one of these things. And so making it much more visible and approachable, and part of being a person, part of being at our best is being a whole person, not just part of a person. And we spend all these time and resources on the physical well-being and all that, which is tremendous, or on the physical aspects of sport. So we have player development, but very little people development. And so for most of my years until more recently, I was an undercover psychotherapist.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I have given talks about that where, here we are, we're wanting to help people, but you get the eye roll of the coaches, you get the player who's threatened, you get the trainer who's, you name it, or the parents, or well, it brings me to the next subject, and we're talking to Rick Aberman. I'm sure you have some strong opinions about, the pressures that young people, again, boys and girls, face now with parental guidance. When you use that word loosely, but the pressures of specializing in sports, the getting the scholarship, being in the first line or whatever it might be. Because it's the reason we did a study many years ago on CCO TV about why people, sports for the right reason, why kids drop out of sports, and the biggest reason was that they stopped having fun.
Yeah,
they weren't. They wanted to be with the kids that they grew up with, and when that no longer existed, and they were being pressured into maybe playing one sport, and if they weren't enjoying it, so as a parent, what kind of advice do you give to them to say, look, you got to back off. You got to know your kid, but you can't put that kind of pressure on them, because we see kids getting burned out so fast these days.
Yeah, you do, and I think it's in many things, and it's you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer, or those kinds of things as well.
Right.
But this is kind of one of the key leadership challenges that most leaders face, and it starts with being a parent leader. Our parents are our first leaders that we encounter, correct? And that anytime when it becomes more about the parents than the kid, that's probably not the best thing. So your job as a parent is to look after the well-being of your child and to help your child develop so that they can be autonomous and function on their own and contribute to society and create their families, all of those kinds of things. But if your ego gets in the way and now you're making it about you, now it becomes about more of a control. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have any control over our kids. And that's not at all. But what I am saying in terms of their development and their interests and where they want to go, my parents never said, oh, you need to be this or you need to be that. They gave me a belief in myself and the security of knowing that they are there and there's boundaries and I'm safe enough to take the risks necessary to be at my best. That's what we want to provide to our children. That's what leaders also want to do.
But, there are also inherent pressures many times, low-income families, whatever it might be, saying my way out is this scholarship. So my kid has got to work his or her tail off to get that scholarship no matter what. And I'm going to be there to make sure that they're doing that.
So that child is starting work at a very young age, in a sense, is employed by the family to live out what the family, or in this case, the parents are wanting them to do. So that's a different kind of child labor that, we don't think about it that way, but, what are we creating, And I think we have to ask ourselves that question in just about everything. What are my actions and behavior? What are they leading to, and what do they result in? And thinking beyond oneself. And it's not an easy thing. And nowadays, you talk about the scholarship, forget the scholarship. Now everybody's their own corporation. Right. And the scholarship is not, you're just going to offer me a scholarship.
That's
I'm not coming to your school.
No, it's all about the name, image, and likeness.
Right. And, and
money,
again,
how much are you going to pay me?
and providing for families. I mean, that's wonderful opportunity.
Right.
But that's really the case in just about anything. We have to make sure that when people say it's not fun anymore, it becomes a job. It's a have to. It becomes a need versus a want. And anytime we get into a situation where where we're needing versus wanting, especially in something that's supposed to be good like sports, that's a really tough place to go. And the more success you have, the more dependent you become on the sport, the more others become dependent on you, that you can be standing there on the mound in a major league game, being one of the best and feeling like you got no choice but to be out there and throw a strike here.
Well, if I was at college, junior college, maybe even in high school, I think that there should be a lot more Rick Abermans on the staff. I mean, this is a world that you saw kind of from its infancy to where now it has become almost imperative that you have someone to talk to, and it's not an embarrassment. Like you said, starting out, like I was a kid, my parents are taking me to a psychologist.
Right.
It's the old stigma of, oh man, what's wrong with you? And now it's a whole different world we live in.
Yeah, it is. So, I always try and frame it in terms of asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but a strength.
Right.
Like, why wouldn't you want the help? Why wouldn't you want the knowledge? Why wouldn't you want to learn as much about yourself as you can if you want to be at your potential, as good as you can be and as happy as you can be? And so to demystify that, I think is really important and make it part of our normal everyday world. And certainly we can, when there's crisis, we'll help people, but I just as soon get them before they jump off the bridge. I just as soon help them become more whole and more comfortable with dealing with their inner worlds before we get to problems that are more observable to others. And there is much more discussion about mental health and all those things. But I do have to say, Mark, that much of what I'm seeing, I suppose it's like the advance of everything. I don't even recognize it. And I'm not sure it's all that great.
Yeah.
Because, again, we tend to focus on what we do versus who we are as a person. And that's a much harder sell. In other words, from a business standpoint, it's like, it's show me something tangible. What's the ROI on that? The return on investment. So we make things very concrete, and we teach these skills. The mental skills, and every team has mental skills programs now, and that's all okay. But it's not necessarily helping people learn how to be fully developed as people. And, people come and they want a trick, and, what do I, doc, help me here. I need to do this or that. And it's like, okay, maybe, but we can do that. But I'm one of these guys that ask why.
And we've been concentrating on the athletic standpoint more than the academic or social part of it. But those two components have to be integral to the development of a young person. And that's also the pressures that build up internally and externally from parents, from,
no question.
You have to get A's, you have to do this, and it's now it seems like it's more than ever where, keeping up with Bobby and Susie, whomever, is almost impossible for some of these young kids. And that's where we're seeing so many cracks and so many problems with these kids.
And so what we can do, because we're not going to stop that. And it's not all bad.
No.
There's many great things that will come from it. And just like it's always been that way, it evolves. But what we can do is we can help people feel like they are part of something, that they belong to something. That's a basic human need versus I'm out there on my own trying to create something on my own. I've isolated everybody because I'm so into what I'm doing. I have no social skills. I can't look people in the eye. I can't talk with them in person. I can text. I can do things like that. But that doesn't bring a full life. And so in terms of really helping people, prepare them, feeling safe enough, knowing that there's a boundary so that I can take that risk necessary to be at my best. We talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability, most athletes and high performers have worked so hard to not be vulnerable. And that's exactly what gets in their way.
Interesting.
And in order to be at our best, in order for me to lay out and catch a ball, make the great play, I have to be vulnerable, risk that it may not work. But if I'm not willing to take that risk, I'm not going to do it. So vulnerability is a strength, and boy, people are fearful of that, especially high achievers, especially males, especially perfectionists, especially people who are driven and achievement oriented.
That's a great word and a message to hang on to for forever. So you are in town?
Yes.
Can people get a hold of you anywhere?
You can Google me. I'm around.
All right.
Rick Aberman at rickaberman.com.
There you go.
I am, as I say, I've been busier than ever, and
That's great.
It's trying to help where I can.
Well, from one St. Louis Park Oriole to another, thanks so much for your contributions and for this really interesting conversation today, Rick, and I'm glad we were able to connect.
Well, it was a lot of fun, Mark. Good to see you. Thank you.
You.
Yeah.